Wednesday's meeting. This is a special day for us because for the first time since I can remember, this is a double header. We had a meeting this morning, which was well attended for purposes, the same purpose of tonight's meeting, and that is our focus on the potential school building project. But I'm going to open this meeting. Today is April 12th, and we are being recorded by WestCat today. And as we begin all our meetings, we start with Pledge of Allegiance. Our superintendent, to give the presentation, and then we will open up the floor for public participation.
Great. And I will do that in 1 second, but first we have somebody with us tonight. I just want to introduce the community to Michael Redmond, who is our newly appointed middle school principal. I spent a couple of days in the district already, and then the Thursday meeting with teachers, and actually did his second big meeting with the district leadership team today, so he's already
Great. Welcome.
a Westwood Wolverine, or maybe a Thurston Bulldog. Yes, that's right. So welcome. So thanks very much for being here. Our purpose tonight is really to talk about this potential school building project, and so I want to try to give folks a sense of what the issues are, the steps that we've taken so far, and really make sure that people understand the decision that we have in front of us as a community coming up this spring at town meeting. So I'm just going to kind of go through some slides and give people an overview, and then we will be opening it up, and we will do our best to answer whatever questions that you may have. So I have this as my first bullet, though I don't think I actually need to say it, that Westwood is known for its public schools, right? That's sort of Westwood's claim to fame. I will take this moment to note that Principal Bevan from the high school just this week was at the State House and had his picture taken with Governor Baker, receiving a commendation from the state for Westwood High School for recognizing high recognizing the high school's high achievement and high progress.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. So we're very proud of our outcomes in this district, and in fact, when I'm speaking with residents, then I'm struck by how often people tell me that the reason they moved to Westwood is for the schools. So the issue that we're talking about tonight is that 3 out of our 5 elementary schools are in need of modernization. We have 3 schools, Deerfield, Hanlon, and Sheehan, that were built between 1948 and 1953. So they are aging buildings. And they're presenting some challenges for us, literally in terms of the physical plant, given the age of the buildings, but also in terms of how they were designed at the time in the 40s and 50s, and the fact that some aspects of the buildings don't reflect the kind of teaching and learning that we're trying to do right now. So to give you a sense of where we are in this process, bottom line, we need to figure out how to address our school building needs, and there are many possible ways that we might do that. And then sort of the other piece is that if it's possible to get some assistance, some funding from the state to address these building needs, then that just seems to make sense. And so we have gone down a path that we've done before in Westwood, which is to work with a state program. It's called the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And this group, MSBA, is a competitive grant program that provides partial reimbursement to local communities to fund school renovations or construction projects. And we've done this before. So our high school, which opened in 2005, was built with a significant amount of state money. At that time, the program was very robust, and we were able to get 59% of the high school project reimbursed. Sadly, those days are over. The reimbursement now is more like a third. And then also in the early 2000s, Martha Jones and Downey elementary schools underwent full renovations, again, significant state funding. So we once again have started down this process to become eligible to receive those funds. We got very exciting news. We submitted an application last spring, and in December, we were invited by the MSBA into what they call the eligibility phase, which is basically a 9-month period where they're saying, we are willing to work with you on some project to address your building needs. And during this eligibility phase, frankly, they're checking out sort of the will of the community to move forward with this project. It's a very exciting opportunity, and to give people a sense of scale, there were, I believe, 82 districts who applied during this past round, and only 15 were invited into the process. We were one of them. When Carol and Petraka and I were there to get the good news, other districts were saying things like, we've been through this process year after year, we've applied 7 years in a row, and so we were really excited to have the opportunity on this first application. If you think about it though, the bad news there is that there was something about our application that moved us to the top of that list, and the people at MSBA agreed that our needs are significant. So we're in the eligibility phase, and the question that's before the community right now is whether or not we take the next step with the state and continue down this process towards getting state funding. So that is the decision to be made at this point. I do just want to take a minute to say that we started down a path of addressing our building needs a couple of years ago, and some members of the community may remember that. And we decided as a committee this year that we were really going to hit the reset button on that. So we did some work a couple years ago. We did a master planning study, a capital needs space study, and it was good work, and we began to think about possible solutions. But in that process, at some point, we realized that we hadn't done a sufficient job engaging the community in the decision-making process, and that created some upset. And so we reflected on that and have really sort of committed to redoubling our efforts to make sure that we involve the community in any decision about how to go forward with the project. We also realized that we clearly really wanted to work with the MSBA to get this funding, and they were very clear with us that districts are required to work within their prescribed process, and they strongly encouraged us not to get out ahead of them and make any decisions about the scope or nature of the project until they also were working with us collaboratively. So we've kind of paused on some things that we started a couple years ago. So a couple of things about the MSBA process itself. It is a competitive grant program, and the way that it works is that each time we purchase something in Massachusetts, a tiny portion of that sales tax goes into this fund, and through this competitive grant process, local communities can potentially then get some of that money back to fund school projects. The reimbursement rate right now is between 31 and 34% of the cost of the project. As I said, the MSBA voted to invite Westwood into its eligibility period. Our eligibility period starts June 1 and goes through next February. During this eligibility phase, we're required to do some things, to provide some deliverables. And the most significant thing that we need to do is the community needs to approve borrowing to undertake the next phase of the MSBA process, which is called a feasibility study. So that is the question that we're going to be faced with through a warrant article this May at town meeting, is whether or not we will approve the borrowing to do that feasibility study. And I'll say more about the feasibility study in a second. But if the funding is secured for the feasibility study, it gives us an opportunity to engage in a long, about 30-month community process to identify all the possible projects that we might do to address our building needs, to sort of whittle it down to a preferred option. And at the end of that feasibility study, we would have our schematic design done by an architect for our preferred project. And at that point, there would be sort of a second community process to secure the funding to actually build the project. That would be presumably a referendum for a debt exclusion, some kind of process like that. So just a little bit about our schools. The Deerfield School was built in 1953. Sort of funny fact about it is that it was originally designed to be a bomb shelter. We put on a modular addition in 1995. We were experiencing a space crunch at that time. We put on a couple of temporary classrooms, which we're still using, so we think they're probably not temporary at this point. And it's about 35,000 square feet. It's a fairly small school. The Hanlon School, which some people might remember as the Pine Hill School, was built in 1951. We also added a 3-room modular addition to Hanlon in 2004. It's about the same size as Deerfield. What's interesting about the Hanlon School is that it sits on about 36 acres of school department land. So there's an interesting opportunity there when we start to contemplate what building projects might look like, or sort of the logistics of how we might keep kids in school while we were conducting some kind of project. And then finally, the school that we're in tonight is the William Sheehan School. It's the oldest and largest of the town's elementary schools. It was built in 1948. We put an addition on in the 1960s that we still call the new wing of Sheehan. And it's about 50,000 square feet. It's on about 4¼ acres of land. So for the last couple of months, we've really been doing our best to engage the community in thinking about these needs. The school committee hosted open house tours of our elementary schools back at the beginning of March on a Saturday and Sunday. We had some folks come through and see our buildings. I think a lot of people have the experience maybe of going from the parking lot to the gym for youth basketball, but don't necessarily know the ins and outs of the building. So we think it was helpful for people to see them, and we also learned quite a bit from talking to the people who came on tours. So I want to tell you some of the things that we shared with folks on those tours. So, fundamentally, we have buildings that are about 70 years old, and some of the systems are just nearing the end of their useful life. And I really want to emphasize that the school department feels a tremendous sense of stewardship for our facilities. We really invest a lot of money and energy in maintaining our buildings and taking good care of them. And so I think that our needs don't reflect something about the way that we've been maintaining the buildings. It's simply a function of the fact that they're old, and some of the systems now have reached the end of their useful life. So we've talked about the fact that the Hanlon School, for example, needs a new roof. It would cost about $1 million to replace the roof on Hanlon. And so we're faced with this question of, do we invest that kind of money in replacing a roof on a building where we know that the plumbing is failing and the electrical system is original? And so these are some of the things that we're contemplating when we're trying to make fiscally responsible decisions. So you can see here on the slide, this is a picture of one of the pipes at Hanlon. Pipes are old, they're kind of disintegrating, we're patching them up. Our attempts to do a big plumbing project were thwarted because we couldn't get anybody to bid the project. They came in, took a look and said, the system's old, we don't do this kind of work anymore. It's hard to see in the slide, but the window at the Sheehan, there's a little Post-it note on it that says, do not open. A lot of the windows here in Sheehan aren't really functioning properly anymore. We've got HVAC challenges. Some of our classrooms are really, really hot, and then you go next door and it's really, really cold. We're not able to regulate the temperature, and therefore we end up doing things that are kind of inefficient and not cost effective. So, it's really hot in the classroom in January, and we end up opening a window or installing an AC unit to try to create conditions where kids can learn, and that's clearly not a good strategy long term. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with these issues. And then there are other concerns. So this is a picture of the main office, the door to the main office in the Sheehan School. And If you've ever sort of come in through that entrance, you know that the entrance to the building is down the hall where it says exit, down there by those doors, and then you turn right and go down a set of stairs and you'd be at the main entrance. And it's an example of how some of our buildings just aren't built the way that modern elementary schools would be. So if you design an elementary building today, you're concerned with safety and security, you'd have a clear sight line from the main office to the main entrance, so that when people are entering our buildings, you know, it's not possible to just head down a set of stairs or head upstairs and get into the classroom part of the buildings. And when MSBA came out to visit us at Hanlon back in December, that was actually the first thing they commented on in Hanlon. They walked into the building and said, there's no sight line here from the main office to the lobby. What I do like about this picture, though, is you see the nice shiny floors, right? The way that we're trying to maintain some of these older buildings. We have some challenges in terms of the size of our classrooms. So there is kind of an industry standard for classroom size today that reflects the kind of teaching and learning that's happening in 2018. Elementary classrooms, grades 1 to 6, are usually about 950 to 1,300 square feet. They're pretty big. Kindergarten classrooms are bigger just because of the kinds of things that's happening with kindergartners. And at the Sheehan School, for instance, where we are tonight, about 90% of our classrooms are smaller than that industry standard. And so that presents some challenges when we have our big science initiative and we're trying to do inquiry-based kind of hands-on science, and you get out the equipment and the materials, and there's just kind of nowhere to go in the room to do that kind of teaching and learning. So, you know, if we were to design buildings today, school buildings, we would do that with this kind of parameter in mind. This is an example of a classroom at Sheehan. It's up on the 3rd floor. It's a 4th grade classroom. It's just a small room. You can also see here that many of our older buildings aren't built with cabinetry and places to store the kind of materials that we have in elementary classrooms now. So this actually isn't, this is pretty spacious comparatively, but some of the classrooms here as I walk around Sheehan, everything is neat and orderly and in its place, but you kind of feel like you're surrounded by stuff. There's just kind of stuff everywhere. And when you look at classrooms that are built more recently, they have storage, they're sort of spacious, and just bigger.
Apologies for being late.
That's right. Hello, Mr.
I hope my replacement next year is much more
And then we think about the kind of space that we have that may or may not support the programming that is important to us. So, you know, we're very interested in the arts in Westwood and giving kids a good arts experience. This is the art classroom at the Deerfield School, and it was actually originally designed to be a locker room at Deerfield. It wasn't supposed to be a classroom, but we've converted it. And you can see it's just very, very small, and it limits the kinds of work that kids can be doing in the art classroom. The vantage point here is also kind of looking down into the room, because at the Deerfield you have to descend a set of stairs to get into this space, which illustrates another challenge that our buildings aren't ADA compliant. So the Sheehan School, for example, it's 3 stories, there's no elevator. We really aren't able to accommodate the needs of all of our students in these buildings. This is an example of an elementary art classroom that was built within the last couple of years up in Burlington, Massachusetts. And you know, I think the photo speaks for itself, right? It's just a different kind of learning space. You can see all the sinks so that kids can wash up, and you can rinse out the brushes. And there's just more room for your art. This is the library at the Deerfield School. Similar situation at Hanlon, where our libraries weren't intended to be libraries, so they are classroom spaces that we've converted into libraries. And you can get a sense of the impact of that. So in order to fit our collection in, our books, you can see the stacks, we've just kind of built them up. And elementary libraries, you like the stacks to be low so that young kids can actually see the books and get their hands on them. We also are doing a lot of thinking about what elementary libraries are for today, and our librarians are very in tune to that. They're piloting sort of a learning lab, makerspace kind of model. And I think this is an example of how the facility doesn't really facilitate that kind of teaching and learning. So all that stuff that you see out there is because Mrs. Crass, who is our awesome Deerfield librarian, is trying to do all these kinds of interesting engineering projects and tinkering and makerspace kinds of things, and there's just nowhere to store the kids' projects from week to week. This is a photo of an elementary school library up in Andover, Mass. That was built recently. You can see how the space is different. This is a picture looking down the corridor at the Deerfield School. One of the things that's happened is, well, two things. So buildings that were built in the 40s and 50s were built before special education was something that was at all a reality. It was built at a time when the teaching and learning model didn't have to do with working with kids in small spaces. We didn't have literacy specialists and math specialists, and we weren't doing things in pull-out groups or differentiating for kids. And so we don't have a building that's designed with those kinds of spaces and needs in mind. And also, we just ended up converting a lot of our storage closets and custodial closets into offices. So we ended up with a scenario like this where you can see we have tables set up and teachers would be working with students in those kind of pull-out groups out in the hallway, as opposed to a corridor like you see in Andover. This is another example. This is from the Sheehan School where, again, we've created like a little small group instruction space in the corridor. You can also see here what's happening with storage. So there are a couple of big carts, and inside that's where we store our Chromebooks, our laptops for kids, because we don't have anywhere to store them in the classroom. This is an example from the Hanlon School of how we're sort of carving spaces out of bigger spaces. So you're looking from the hallway in the door of the speech language pathologist's office, and it's also where she does services with kids, meets with kids. And then if you keep walking through her office, through that next door, you're in the school psychologist's office. Same situation, that's where her office is, and also has a little table to do services with kids. What you can't see here is that if you walk through speech and language and turn right, that's the door to the health office, to where the nurse's office is. So we just had to sort of think about all these services that maybe didn't exist in 1953 and create spaces for them. Clearly, this presents some confidentiality challenges. This is again at the Sheehan School. So this is over there in the Sheehan. It's the teacher workroom where they print things and make copies and whatnot. It's also, we're using it to store our literacy materials, and you can see we've created little breakout spaces where math specialists deliver services to students as well. So, the big picture here is that we have these needs that have to do with physical plant, have to do with making things ADA compliant, and have to do with our desire to really have modern places of learning that reflect what we're trying to do and the quality of education that we want to be able to give our students. And so right now we're in the process of trying to figure out what is the fiscally responsible way to do that. And we want to have a big community conversation about that issue. So our next steps. So as I mentioned, we have this opportunity to partner with the state and to get a significant amount of funding towards whatever solution it is that we ultimately determine is right for Westwood. So there is a school committee warrant article at town meeting this May 30th, and it is to approve borrowing in an amount that's not to exceed $1.75 million, which would fund the feasibility study. So it would take us through that 30-month process of making decisions about what's right for the community. It would involve working with an architect, and at the end of that, we would have the design to go forward with whatever preferred project we had come up with and the school committee had ultimately determined. So it would fund everything up to the moment of actually constructing the buildings. I do want to mention, because I think this is potentially confusing, that the warrant article at town meeting only references borrowing to fund a feasibility study for the Hanlon School. That is because the MSBA process, they only let you apply for one school. So that's their parameter. We used the Hanlon in our application because we thought it was the building that kind of gave us the best chance of being invited into the process. But the MSBA was clear with us in that process and are still clear that once you get invited in, the conversation with them then broadens to include our other needs. They're very motivated to work with communities to come up with a reasonable, cost-effective plan for taking care of many needs. Their mission has to do with getting old school buildings off the rolls. So if we come up with plans that can sort of further that mission, then they are happy to talk with us about it. But unfortunately, the language of the warrant article is their prescribed sort of, legalese, and so we had to say Hanlon School. So the feasibility study is the process to allow us to have this community conversation about what the project should look like. And I want to emphasize that we have made no decisions at this point about what the solution is. And we're kind of having to counteract a little bit some chatter that I think dates back to 2 years ago when we started doing some work. And so I hear terms like super Hanlon and mega school thrown around. And to the extent that I can assure people that we have made no decisions, I want to assure people we're just not there yet. The process for all those conversations and decision making is the feasibility study. And the feasibility study is the way that we get the MSBA funding. There is no other way forward with the MSBA to get the state funding other than the feasibility study. It's the only way forward to work with them. I mentioned we've done successful projects with MSBA before. The state funding has been really important in the past. If the project ultimately goes forward, funding for the feasibility study would also be eligible then for MSBA reimbursement. So we could get a third of the feasibility study reimbursed. And this is a very important part. I should probably have this on the first slide now that I think about it. The borrowing article for the feasibility study will not raise people's taxes. The town can pay back the feasibility study within its debt service. We're not talking about overrides. We're not talking about any impact on the school department's operating budget. We have worked very collaboratively with the town, and Pam Dukeman, the finance director, and she assured me that this can happen within the town's debt service. So really, our only question right now is whether or not to go forward with the feasibility process. If the project goes forward, we're talking about probably a 6 to 10 year timeline before a renovated or new school would be open. And that's significant because this conversation right now, the process we're in, really is about stewardship. It's often not about how this is going to impact my kid and the classroom that they will go to in elementary school. It's really about a 50-year investment that the community would make in its schools. And I've been saying to a lot of people who have elementary kids, yeah, your student may not go to this elementary school, but good news, your student is going to a fantastic high school that some other Westwood residents paid for, and that's kind of the cycle in communities. And luckily, I think most people really get that. So it's been great to talk to people. So that, I think, is it. We have a website where all of this information is posted and more. And we are really trying to make sure the word is out.
Good. So at this point, first of all, I want to thank those of you, obviously I thank principals who are here, but the folks from the community who have come to listen to this. It's so important. We're working very hard to get the word out, and we want to open the floor up for questions at this point, and then we can continue some discussion if need be, but it's so important that we get the word out, and we hope that this presentation has resonated with you and that you can be ambassadors to this project for us. We're hopeful that Emily's name will become a household word, and that everyone will...
Unfortunate advocate.
No, all positive, in a good way. And that we will be hearing discussions on this subject everywhere, on the soccer fields, at the PTO meetings, and so on and so forth, to the point where there should be no one in this town who has not heard about what we're doing or what we're trying to do to provide really a legacy for the folks, the future residents even of Westwood. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor and see if anyone has any questions, comments, thoughts. Yes.
Al Fusco, 25 Lane. Oh, thank you very much. A lot of projects going on in the town, have gone on, and this, it's not a patrol project yet, but this initiative is equally important in my mind as the police station, right? So this does need to go forward, in my opinion. Do you think that there are any challenges towards engaging residents and getting them on board in the face of other initiatives that have recently occurred and are planned to occur in the town, that people may feel overwhelmed?
Well, that's a good point, and we can answer that probably in a couple ways. Do you want to start with the committee that we sit on?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important thing to think about. So there is a town-wide building task force, I guess you could say, committee, and the school department participates in that. One of the things that we've talked about at that committee is looking at sort of all the building needs in town on the municipal side, school department side, and that group has agreed that since the school department has this opportunity to get funding through the MSBA, that the school project is now the top priority in town. And the members of that committee have agreed that other needs will be put on hold or sort of set aside for the time being, while we all focus on this school project, which, I think the school department very much appreciates that level of collaboration and focus. But I think there is a political question there about residents' will. So
There is definitely a political question about residents' will, and I think one point we want to emphasize too is we stand to gain funding of a third of this project. And if we don't move forward with this, we leave money on the table. And that is that's one thing, aside from the fact that the schools are so important in this town, so important to the residents, and really what make this town, but also that sets this project apart from other projects in town, where we do have this funding and we have been able to enter this stage. So that would be my 2 cents to start. How about any other folks here?
I just want to say that not doing anything is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't go forward with the initiative because town doesn't support it, we can't just let the schools, we'll leave them as they are. I mean, we would have to do something. It might not be to the extent that we're talking now, but definitely have to do something.
And I guess I would say that, we've sort of assessed the situation, and not just us. I mean, we've gotten some professional advice as part of that study that we did 2 years ago. And frankly, though building projects are expensive to build projects, I think ultimately they are the cost-efficient, least expensive way to go about addressing these needs. I mean, to continue to sort of band-aid things piecemeal,
The most expensive.
it is the most expensive way to go about it. So to your point, yeah, doing nothing isn't an option, and we will have to address the building needs. And I think it would be a shame to be here in 5 years and not have the state reimbursement on the table and have to fund it all locally.
There was also an interesting point that someone made today, and that also I think would resonate with residents when we're talking about this. This is a hard project because none of us will have kids in the schools, so it's hard to get people to be forward-thinking. But if you want to think about the present and maybe in the next 10 or 15 years, we talked about, someone raised the issue of property values, and that really our property values here in town, what sets us apart from many other towns, and the reason why our properties maintain their value is because of the schools. Mm-hmm. So if we want to be in an upward trajectory with our schools, and we want to really provide the best possible education, if we don't do that, there could be an impact for sure. So I
just
thought
like-
that was a good point brought up today.
Thank you for coming out tonight. I think, to me, the most important issue here is I've been to a number of town meetings where when something requires a 2/3 vote, you don't know who these people are in the audience, okay? So this could lose, okay, at the town meeting. If you don't get 2/3, it's very hard to get. So I'd say the most valuable thing each of you could do tonight, as you leave here, is if you could call up 10 friends and plead with them to come to the town meeting. I mean, that seriously is what you're going to need, because you could lose, even with all the logical things that have been said. Other towns with projects like this, they're talking $50, $60 million. To get $20 million from the state, you got to be crazy, and it's not going to raise your taxes. But a town meeting isn't necessarily based on logic, okay? So if we don't have the votes out there, forget moving ahead with any of this and all the hard work that's been done. I do think, it's been said already, that the town has first-rate library, senior citizen, police station, fire station, and high school. I mean, we've really got the best there could be. But and we also have upgraded Martha Jones and Downey. You know, those schools don't have a lot of the problems that you've seen here. But I was interested in what other towns are doing. And on the school committee, we often look at how good our MCAS scores are, because people buying the property here and selling their property where they live because of the school system. No different. Our real estate people tell us that's why people move to the town. So we're very competitive. Are we good? How do people measure us? And so some of the towns we look at sometimes to say, what are they doing? You know, I can tell you they don't have 3 brand new buildings like I just mentioned. All of those they don't have. But some of these towns, Needham, Dover, and Belmont, each have built in the last 15 years, brand new elementary schools. Weston and Duxbury have built 2 new elementary schools in the last 15 years. Winchester and Concord Carlisle have built 3 new elementary schools. And Lexington, on how they do it, have built 4 new elementary schools. So that's some of the competition. We're very lucky in this town to get some of the best teachers you'll ever find. If a job opening comes up here, the teachers want to come here, even though they're using closets to teach. You know, the quality is here, they want to come here. But it can just last so long, you know, when you can go to one of these beautiful new buildings. And so we're very lucky at the moment. We have great administration and great teachers. But it's a crucial thing that we begin to start getting the support behind, at least catching up to the other towns, what they've already done. We're not, you know, basically asking for something that's crazy. But we do need, the number one priority is, if you don't get this vote, forget anything we've said tonight. Now, if we don't get the vote, somebody asked us, what are you going to do? Well, we did spend with a very well thought of engineering firm has gone through the 3 schools that we're looking at most carefully. And on the engineering reports, these are words that were in the report. 15 mentions non-compliance with code. Now, we are reacting to these things and trying to become compliant. 11 mentions it's inadequate. 10 mentions it's poor condition. 7 times it's the original 1940s and 50s equipment, pipes, electrical systems. 4 times beyond life expectancy. 5 times fair condition, 5 times deteriorating. 4 times not accessible to ADA disabilities things. 4 containing asbestos. The ones that I really got a hit, critically poor condition. Catastrophic failure, distinct possibility. So you're reading this from engineers telling us if we don't do this with state support, we're going to have to do this. All these things have to be changed. We'll spend twice as much money. $1 million roof on an old building. So that's the downside of not doing this. But again, I can't emphasize strongly enough, I've seen some crazy things happen at a town meeting when the logical thing doesn't happen. And my suggestion is if each of you get 10 people to show up, and we get other groups to bring 10 people, we at least can get through step 1. But thank you very much for coming tonight and hearing us out.
Yeah, I mean, I've now given this presentation to, I think, 10 different forums, right? PTOs, community forums. And I can tell you, it's been a great experience. And the feedback that I've gotten from the people who've attended the forums is that it all makes sense to them, and this seems like a clear way forward. So it's been really positive in that sense. But I think Mr. Donahue makes an important point, which is decisions get made by the people who show up for town meeting. And so that's really the key, is that, we need to make sure that there are bodies in the seats at town meeting to be part of the decision-making process. I think that's what it comes down to.
So I saw that you
Do
referenced
you
a
mind,
couple of...
could you please identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, yes, my name is Sarah Nataraja. I have a first grader here at the Sheehan School and a 3.5-year-old that may or may not benefit from this in the future. So I saw you reference a couple of times that the plan is to keep the community involved in the decision-making process. And the little bit that I've heard out in the community talking to people, the little bit of negativity that I've heard is about after this vote for the feasibility study, that the community would then no longer be involved in the decision-making process. And so I really want to get a little information from you so that when I'm having these conversations with friends and neighbors, how can I really counteract that to let them know what is truly going to be happening after the feasibility study piece is hopefully approved?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I think that's really important. I mean, so the feasibility study, which is a 30-month process, I mean, concretely, the MSBA requires that there be a school building committee that's made up of representatives of the community that sort of ushers that feasibility study through. So there is sort of an official mechanism in that. In addition to that, though, we've really talked a lot at school committee meetings about the fact that the school committee imagines having a whole bunch of these kinds of forums and surveys and whatnot, where we go through a process of identifying, what's important to people. What do we value? What is our vision for our future schools? And through that process, developing a set of criteria that would be, publicly published. So that when we go through a process with the designer and have a bunch of different options before us, that we could say, well, which of these really meets the needs and the values and the criteria that we spelled out through this community process. And that would be, I think, a very transparent decision-making process. And we really will have to think carefully about how to do that and kind of reflect back to people what we're learning along the way. And it's hard because I think ultimately we're asking a question of trust right now, right? And I think we are very committed to making sure that this is a transparent and inclusive process with the community. Understanding that the school committee is an elected body that ultimately does have to make a decision, right? So it will fall to them ultimately to make that decision. I've had some people ask me, like, will we take a vote on which project we do? I mean, no, that isn't realistic. We'll be able to do that. So, there will be lots of questions. Do you keep 5 buildings and renovate? Do you keep your K-5 configuration? Do you consider going K-2, 3, 5 like we had 20 years ago, probably, right? Do you consolidate from 5 to 4? I mean, none of these decisions have been made, and
They're all on the table.
they're all on the table, right? They're all on the table. So I don't know if that'll be a satisfying answer, but it's the real one.
It definitely helps. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions? Thoughts? No? Anyone on the committee?
Can I ask a question I've never asked until I thought about it now? Would the 1.75 also do any potential environmental impacts? I'm particularly thinking of the Hanlon site.
Yes.
And I've heard noise that there's some potential environmental concerns on that.
Yeah. So, yes,
Okay.
is the answer. The feasibility study, the way we arrived at this estimate, and by the way, we hope it actually will be significantly less than 1.75 million. We looked at some comparative data from communities who've done this recently. We worked with an architect, and there are sort of 4 categories of things that you pay for during the feasibility study. One of them is environmental and site testing. And the estimate includes like a contingency because who knows what you find when you do that kind of testing.
Or if you want to test more.
Yeah, you now have to do another. So yes, that's included.
Can we, for the next school committee, get that level of detail? Because I think we're going to go to town meeting and there may be some questions.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I apologize if you said already, date and time of the town meeting?
It is May 30th, and now I think it's 7:30.
They open at 7 for,
High school gym.
Awards, recognitions, and
right.
things like that, and then 7:30 for the business. Right. High school gym, I think. High school gym.
Bring you a cup of coffee, it's a long night.
that wasn't a good way to
I'm
cut that part in the film. Okay.
It
So,
will be an enjoyable evening.
the nice part about having the MSBA and all this too, to your point, Tony, is it's nice to have an organization or whatever we call them, a building authority that really, even though we are hogtied to what their requirements, that's a good thing in that they require us to go through all of these steps. And there are people, experienced people, they've been through this process so many times. So it seems to me that there would be no stone left unturned, to your point about the
I
United
think also they help us not to make mistakes.
Right. I mean, yes, they're investing a lot of their money, and they want it to be a success. But you're reminding me of something that another thing that I heard out there, floating back at me, that I want to counteract tonight. Someone said that Emily said, no, that there wouldn't be any community engagement in the decision-making because we have to use MSBA's plans. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to say out loud, that is not true. That we can choose which architect we work with. We can come up with our own designs. They do have something they call their model school program, where if a community wanted to try to save on costs, you could use some designs that they already have that have been created elsewhere. And I think they do maybe incentivize, did they give you a little extra in the reimbursement if you use their plans? So
It's no longer required.
it's not a requirement. And so, so that is a rumor that's out there that I will say it is false tonight. And if we can get that word out too, that would be
All right, well, if we don't have anything else, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second? All in favor? Head on out. What's that?
There now.
Are you in favor? Do you want to go?